When I walked into the courthouse that morning, my daughter Clara rolled her eyes and whispered something condescending to her husband, Julian. But then something extraordinary happened. The judge looked up, froze completely, and murmured in disbelief. "Is that her?" The entire courtroom fell into absolute silence. None of them had any idea who I really was until that moment. That trial changed everything. My name is Eleanor. I am 69 years old, and until a few months ago, I was just an ordinary grandmother. Every morning I would get up at 6 o'clock, prepare my coffee in the same chipped mug I'd used for 20 years, and look out my small kitchen window while watering the violets my late husband loved so much. It was a simple, predictable life, full of small rituals that gave me peace. For 45 years, I was the mother who sacrificed everything for her only daughter, Clara. I worked cleaning offices at night, sold pies on the weekend, and sewed clothes to earn a few extra dollars. All so she could go to college and have the life I never had. When she married Julian, an arrogant man who never spoke a kind word to me, I swallowed my pride and welcomed them into my home every Sunday with a set table and my best smile. I thought that after I was widowed, Clara and I would grow closer. How naive I was. Instead of finding comfort in our mutual company, my daughter began to see me as a burden. Her visits became obligatory and cold, her calls more spaced out, and her excuses for avoiding time with me more and more creative. The greatest humiliation of my life came on a gray Thursday in October. I had prepared the pot roast that Clara loved so much, the one that took me hours to make but always made her smile as a child. I put out my best tablecloth, the embroidered one I had made when she was a teenager, and even bought fresh flowers for the centerpiece. When they arrived, Julian walked into my house as if he owned it. He plopped down in my late husband's armchair and turned on the television without even saying hello. Clara was wearing a green dress I had bought for her myself, but her expression was as cold as January ice. "Mom, we need to talk," she said in that voice she had developed since getting married, a voice that seemed to come from a stranger. She sat on the edge of her chair as if she were in a hurry to leave. "Julian and I have made a decision," she continued, while he grunted from the armchair without taking his eyes off the screen. "This house is too big for you. You can't maintain it alone anymore. And we need a bigger place for when we have children. We've found a perfect assisted living facility for people your age." I felt as if the floor had opened up beneath my feet. This was the house where Clara had taken her first steps, where we had celebrated every birthday, where her father had died holding my hand. Every corner held our most sacred memories. Every photograph on the walls told our story. "But Clara, this is our home. All our memories are here," I pleaded with a trembling voice, feeling each word break inside me. "Memories are in the heart, Mom, not in the walls," she replied with a coldness that chilled my blood. "Besides, the facility has activities for people like you. You'll be better off there. You'll have company your own age." Julian smiled with satisfaction as he began to size up the rooms with his eyes, as if he were already the owner. "It's for the best, Mrs. Eleanor," he added with that fake smile I hated so much. "We'll take care of all the paperwork. You don't worry about a thing." My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. My own daughter, the child for whom I had sacrificed my youth, my health, and my dreams, was kicking me out of my own house to hand my home over to that despicable man. Tears threatened to spill, but I swallowed them. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. "I need time to think about it," I murmured with the little dignity I had left. "There's not much to think about, Mom," Clara replied, standing up. "It's already decided. They're coming to appraise the house next week." And just like that, they left. They left my pot roast untouched, my flowers wilting, and my heart in pieces on the table where we were once a happy family. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, looking at the photographs hanging on the wall. Clara as a baby, Clara on her first day of school, Clara on her graduation day. In every picture, I was there, holding her, hugging her, smiling with pride. How had it come to this? How could the little girl who once told me I was her hero now treat me like trash? The following days were a nightmare. Julian arrived with an appraiser without warning, a man in a gray suit who walked through my home as if it were an object for sale. He took notes, measured rooms, and talked about potential and necessary renovations as if I wasn't even there. Clara accompanied him, nodding at every disparaging comment about my home. The pipes are old, the appraiser would say, and these kitchen tiles are outdated. You'd have to replace everything. My husband had laid those tiles with his own hands when Clara was 10. Each one represented hours of work, love, and hope for our future. But to them, they were just obstacles to their new life. The humiliation reached its lowest point when Clara brought brochures from the facility. "Look, Mom, it has beautiful gardens and they have bingo on Tuesdays," she told me, with that fake voice she used when she wanted to convince me of something. "Plus, there's a nurse on call 24 hours a day. You'll be safer." Safer? I had lived in this house for 30 years without any problems. I knew all my neighbors, had my routines, my plants, my memories. But to Clara, none of that mattered. All that mattered was that I get out of her way. The day I least expected it, they arrived with papers. Julian entered as if he owned the place, followed by Clara and a man who introduced himself as a lawyer, Mrs. "Eleanor, we've prepared all the documents for the property transfer. We just need your signature." "Transfer?" I asked, confused. "I thought you were going to sell the house." Clara avoided my gaze. "Well, Julian and I decided to keep it. It's better for the family to hold on to properties." That's when I understood everything. It wasn't just that they wanted me out. They wanted to take ownership of my house, the legacy my husband and I had built with so much effort. It was theft disguised as filial concern. "I'm not signing anything," I said with the firmest voice I could muster. Julian stood up abruptly. His face changed completely, showing the aggression he had always kept hidden while my husband was alive. "Ma'am, you're no longer in a condition to make decisions. Clara is your sole heir and is acting in your best interest. This is my house," I shouted, surprising myself with my own strength. "And I'm not leaving." "Mom, don't make this harder," Clara murmured, finally showing some discomfort. "You know you can't keep living alone. Last week you forgot to turn off the gas stove." It was a lie. I had never forgotten to turn off the gas. But Julian smiled, as if he had just found the perfect excuse. "See, Clara? Your mother isn't well anymore. It's dangerous to leave her alone." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if you don't sign voluntarily, we could explore other legal options. A petition for mental incompetency, for example." I felt the world collapsing around me. My own daughter was willing to declare me crazy to steal my house. The man I had accepted as my son-in-law was threatening me in my own living room. And I, a 69-year-old woman, was completely alone against them. "I need time," I murmured, defeated. "You have 1 week," Julian said coldly. "After that, we'll do what we have to do." When they left, I collapsed onto my husband's armchair, and I cried like I hadn't cried since his funeral. I cried for the daughter I had lost, for the home they were taking from me, for the life that was crumbling around me. I felt betrayed, humiliated, completely helpless. That night, for the first time in my life, I considered giving up. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was too old, too weak, too useless to fight. Maybe it was best to accept my fate and disappear quietly, just as they wanted. But then, something inside me refused to die, a small flame of dignity that still burned in my chest. I wasn't going to let them trample all over me. Not after a lifetime of sacrifice and devotion. The next day, Clara returned alone. For a moment, my heart filled with hope. Maybe she had come to her senses. Maybe she had come to ask for my forgiveness. How wrong I was. "Mom, I came to help you pack," she said with that mechanical voice she had adopted. I searched for any trace of the little girl I had raised, but I only found a cold, calculating stranger. "Clara, please, think about what you're doing. I'm your mother." "That's precisely why I'm doing this," she replied, without looking me in the eye. "Because I love you and I want what's best for you." Love? This was love? Stripping me of my home, my dignity, of everything I had left. That was love? For the next few hours, Clara began to pack my belongings as if they were worthless objects. She took my family photographs and threw them carelessly into boxes. She packed the books my husband had given me, the dishes from my wedding china, the tablecloths I had embroidered during years of insomnia. "This dress is so old, Mom. I don't think you'll need it." she said, holding up my mourning dress, the one I had worn to my husband's funeral. Leave it, I begged. Please, leave it. But she had already put it in a bag for donation. My pain didn't matter. My feelings didn't matter. I didn't matter. The final straw was when she found my jewelry box. Inside were my wedding ring, the earrings my husband had given me on our 20th anniversary, and a small gold chain that had belonged to my mother. This jewelry will be safer in a safe deposit box, Clara said, putting them in her personal bag. At the facility, they could get lost or stolen. Those are mine, I shouted, trying to snatch the bag from her. Mom, you're very upset. This just proves you can't take care of yourself, she replied with that sickening calm that made my blood run cold. In that moment, I knew I had lost my daughter forever. The Clara I knew had died, and in her place was this heartless woman, manipulated by Julian and blinded by greed. That night, after Clara left, taking my jewelry and my most precious memories, I was left alone in my half-empty house. The bare walls reminded me of how little I had left, how easy it had been for them to dismantle a lifetime. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my living room floor, surrounded by open boxes and scattered memories, and wondered how I had gotten to this point, at what moment I had become invisible, when I had stopped mattering. The following days were hell. Julian would arrive early each morning to supervise the process, as if I were incapable of packing my own things. He brought strangers who measured, photographed, and evaluated every corner of my house. They talked about me as if I wasn't present, as if I were a piece of old furniture that needed to be removed. The lady will have to speed up the process, Julian told Clara. The movers are coming on Monday. Monday was just 3 days away. It was Friday. I had 3 days left in the home where I had lived for 30 years, where I had raised my daughter, where I had loved and been loved. And if I don't finish packing? I asked in a whisper. Don't worry, Mom, Clara replied without looking up from her phone. The movers will handle everything. You just take the essentials. The essentials. As if an entire life could be reduced to the essentials. That afternoon, after they left, I walked through my house like a ghost. I touched the walls my husband had painted. I sat in each chair where we had eaten breakfast as a family. I opened every drawer that held the small treasures of my past life. In my husband's desk drawer, I found old letters, paid bills, and some documents I had never looked through. Most of it was unimportant, but there was one folder I had never seen before. It was marked with my husband's initials and had a small lock on it. Curious and desperate to find something, anything, to connect me to better times, I searched for the key in all his usual spots. I finally found it inside an old book, marking a page about investments and properties. When I opened the folder, my world changed forever. There were documents I didn't fully understand, but one immediately caught my attention. It was a will, dated just 6 months before my husband's death, that I had never seen before. My hands trembled as I read. My husband had been much more farsighted than I had ever imagined. And Clara, my dear Clara, had no idea what she was about to discover. With trembling hands, I began to read the will that would change my life forever. My husband, who had always been so private about money, had been much busier than I ever knew during his final years. The document revealed that my dear husband hadn't just been the modest employee I thought he was. For decades, he had been quietly investing every extra dollar he earned. He had bought small properties when prices were low. He had invested in stocks of companies that were now worth fortunes, and he had accumulated a wealth I had never imagined in my wildest dreams. But that wasn't all. The will clearly specified that I was the sole heir to everything. Clara would only receive a small sum if I died, and only if she had cared for me with love and respect during my final years. My husband had been wiser than I thought. He had seen something in Julian that I had refused to acknowledge. There was also a clause that left me breathless. My husband owned the entire apartment building where Clara and Julian lived. The apartment they thought they were paying for monthly was actually ours. All the tenants in the building were paying rent to us, and that rent had been automatically deposited into an account I knew nothing about. With trembling fingers, I searched through the papers until I found the bank statements. The figure was astronomical. For 2 years, since my husband's death, I had been living like a poor widow while a fortune was accumulating in the bank. There were more surprises. My husband owned shares in the company where Julian worked. Not just minor shares, but a stake so significant that he could practically influence company decisions. There were also investments in restaurants, small businesses, and even a large plot of land on the outskirts of the city that was now worth millions. I read and reread every document, every contract, every certificate. It was all there, perfectly organized and legal. My husband had built a silent empire, and I was its empress without knowing it. But what struck me most was a personal letter I found at the end of the folder. It was in my husband's handwriting, addressed to me. "My dearest Eleanor," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you, and you have found this treasure I saved for you. Forgive me for not telling you while I was alive, but I wanted it to be a surprise for your golden years. You always worked so hard, you always sacrificed so much for Clara and for me, that I wanted to make sure you would never want for anything." Tears began to roll down my cheeks as I continued reading. I must also confess something. I never fully trusted Julian. There is something about him that I don't like, an ambition that worries me. That is why I structured everything this way. If Clara takes care of you and respects you as you deserve, she will have a comfortable life. But if she ever treats you poorly or tries to take advantage of you, you have all the power to protect yourself. My husband had foreseen exactly what was happening. He had seen through Julian from the beginning and had prepared my defense before he died. Use this power wisely, my love. Not to hurt, but to protect and to teach. Clara is good at heart. She is just confused. But if you need to defend yourself, you now have the tools to do so. Signed, your husband who loves you for all eternity. I sat there on my living room floor, surrounded by documents worth millions, crying for the wise man I had lost and for the daughter I was about to lose. But for the first time in months, they were not tears of defeat. They were tears of gratitude, of hope, and yes, of a quiet satisfaction. Clara and Julian thought they were stripping me of everything. They had no idea that I owned the building where they lived, the shares in the company where he worked, properties all over the city. They thought they were kicking me out of my house to take it for themselves, not knowing that this house was the least valuable thing I owned. I didn't sleep that night, but for the first time in weeks, it wasn't because of sadness. It was because my mind was working, planning, calculating. My husband had given me more than money. He had given me power, and now I had to decide how to use it. Monday morning arrived with a light rain tapping against the windows. Clara and Julian came early with the movers, expecting to find me packed and ready to go. Instead, they found me sitting calmly in my favorite chair, sipping tea as if it were any other day. "Mom, what are you doing?" "The movers are here," Clara said with that impatience she had developed. "I'm not leaving anymore," I replied, with a calm that surprised even myself. Julian approached with that threatening smirk I knew so well. "Mrs. Eleanor, we already talked about this. You don't have a choice." I looked him directly in the eyes for the first time in years. "You're right, Julian. I don't have a choice. But as it turns out, neither do you." Something in my tone must have alerted them, because Clara came closer with a worried expression. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "I'm talking about the fact that I've just discovered something very interesting about my financial situation," I said, taking another sip of tea. "But don't you worry. You'll understand everything soon enough." Julian and Clara looked at me with the expression they reserved for when they thought I was talking nonsense. But I was no longer the frightened woman from the week before. I had a plan, and more importantly, I had the power to execute it. "Mom, enough with the games," Clara said with irritation. "The movers are waiting and they have other jobs after this." "Then let them go," I responded calmly. "Because they're not moving anything here." Julian stood up abruptly. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand the situation. You no longer have a choice in this matter." "On the contrary, Julian. I think it's you two who don't understand the situation." I rose slowly from my chair and walked to the desk where I had left some of the documents I'd found. Not all of them, just the ones I needed for this conversation. "Did you know that the apartment you've been living in for 3 years? You've never been paying the actual owner?" Clara frowned. "What are you talking about?" "We pay our rent religiously every month." "Yes, but you pay a management company that, in turn, deposits the money to me. Because I own the entire building. The silence that followed was deafening. Julian was the first to react with a nervous laugh. That's impossible. You live on a measly pension. I lived on a pension because I chose to, I replied, savoring every second of their confusion. My husband was much smarter than any of us imagined. I showed them one of the property deeds. Clara took it with trembling hands and read it once, twice, 3 times. This can't be real, she murmured. It's as real as the fact that you were kicking me out of my own house to take it for yourselves. But it turns out this house is the least valuable thing I own. Julian snatched the document from Clara's hands. His face turned pale as he read. This has to be fake, a forged document. You can verify it whenever you'd like, I said, with a smile I hadn't felt in months. In fact, I encourage you to. Clara sank onto the sofa, as if her legs had been cut out from under her. Why did you never tell us? Because I didn't even know myself until 3 days ago. Your father kept this secret to protect me. How far-sighted of him. Julian started pacing the living room, clearly agitated. This changes everything, Clara. If your mother really owns the building, it means I can evict you whenever I want. I completed the sentence for him, along with all the other tenants who have been paying me promptly for 2 years. You can't do that, Clara said in a broken voice. We're family. Family? The word came out of my mouth with more bitterness than I intended. Like when you tried to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal my house? Like when you packed up my memories like they were garbage? Like when you took my mother's jewelry? Clara began to cry, but these were no longer the manipulative tears she had learned to use. They were tears of genuine terror. Mom, please, we can fix this. It was all Julian's idea. Clara, Julian shouted, furious that she was blaming him. It's true, she continued, ignoring him. He convinced me it was for the best. He said you were losing your memory, that you couldn't take care of yourself. And you believed him? I asked, feeling my heart break all over again. You know your own mother so little that you believed him over your own intuition? The movers, who had been waiting at the entrance, approached, confused. Excuse me, are you taking the stuff or not? Because we have another job in an hour. No, I replied firmly. Nothing is being moved here. You can leave. Julian stepped toward me with that aggression he had always kept hidden. This isn't over, you old hag. We're going to contest these documents. We're going to prove they're fake. Go ahead, I said, unfazed. In the meantime, I hope you have enough money saved to find another place to live. Because on the 1st of next month, you'll be receiving an eviction notice. You can't do this to us, Julian screamed, losing his composure completely. I can, and I will. But don't worry, I'll be fair. I'll give you the 30 days required by law. Clara jumped up from the sofa. Mom, please, you have to understand. Julian told me that if I didn't convince you to move, he would leave me. He said he couldn't stand living knowing you were here alone, being a danger to yourself. And that justifies everything you did to me? I asked. Does it justify treating me like trash, packing my memories without care, taking your grandmother's jewelry? I'll give them back to you right now, Clara said, desperately searching her purse. It's too late for that, Clara. Julian approached again, but this time his attitude was different, no longer threatening, but almost pleading. Mrs. Eleanor, we can reach an agreement. Clara is pregnant. Are you really going to throw your own grandchild out on the street? I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Clara was pregnant, and she hadn't told me. I was going to be a grandmother, and I was finding out as a piece of blackmail. Is it true? I asked Clara. She nodded through her tears. I wanted to tell you in a different way. I wanted it to be a special surprise. Like the surprise of kicking me out of my house, I replied, though I felt my resolve beginning to waver. But then I remembered my husband's words in his letter. Not to hurt, but to protect and to teach. Clara needed to learn, and her son or daughter deserved to grow up with different values than the ones Julian was teaching. The news of the pregnancy disarmed me for a moment, but then I remembered all the pain they had caused me. A baby didn't erase the humiliation, the contempt, or the months of suffering they had put me through. Congratulations on the baby, Clara, I said with a calm that took a great deal of effort to maintain. But that doesn't change what you did to me. Mom, please, Clara begged, Think of your grandchild. Do you really want them to grow up without knowing their grandmother? Their grandmother was here the whole time, I replied. You were the ones who decided to get rid of me. Julian tried one last manipulation. Mrs. Eleanor, if you really have as much money as you say, why don't you help us instead of punishing us? We could be a united family. I looked at him with the contempt he deserved. A united family? Like when you threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent. Like when you turned my daughter against me. I never. Be quiet, Julian. I interrupted him with an authority I didn't know I possessed. I've heard enough of your lies. The movers had left, leaving us alone in the tension that filled the entire house. Clara was crying silently. Julian was pacing like a caged animal, and I felt strangely calm for the first time in months. This is what's going to happen, I announced. You have 30 days to find another place to live. During that time, I don't want to see you here unless it's for a real emergency. And after that? Clara asked in a broken voice. After that, we'll see if you've learned anything about respect and family. Julian exploded. This is emotional blackmail. You're using your money to manipulate us. Manipulation? The word made me laugh bitterly. Like when you used my supposed mental incompetence to manipulate me? Like when you used my love as a mother to blackmail me? It's different, Julian muttered, but he no longer sounded convincing, even to himself. You're right, I admitted. It is different, because I actually have the power I'm using. Clara rose from the sofa with slow movements. Is there anything we can do to make you change your mind? Yes, I replied without hesitation, but I don't think Julian is willing to do it. What is it? She asked, clinging to that hope. I want an apology. A real, sincere apology for every humiliation you put me through. I want you to admit that you treated me like trash, and I want Julian to acknowledge that this was all his idea. Julian's face turned red with anger. I will never humiliate myself before you. Then get ready to move, I said simply. Clara looked at him pleadingly. Julian, please. She's my mother. She's your mother-in-law. We can swallow our pride for our child. No, he shouted. I'm not kneeling before this manipulative old woman. The insult hung in the air like a slap. Clara stared, finally seeing her husband without the lens of blind love. Manipulative old woman? I repeated softly. Interesting. So that's what you really think of me. Julian, no, Clara murmured. But he had already lost control. Yes, that's what I think. A bitter old woman who can't stand to see her daughter happy. That's why you invented this whole story about the money. Invented? I walked to the desk and pulled out more documents. Did I also invent these bank statements? Did I invent these property deeds? Did I invent these stock certificates? I laid each document on the dining room table, one by one, until the surface was covered with irrefutable proof of my fortune. Clara approached and began to examine the papers with trembling hands. Oh my God, Mom, this island. This is all real. Very real, I confirmed. And now you understand why your husband is so desperate to discredit me. Julian tried one last resort. Clara, you can't believe your mother hid all this for years. She's a liar. No, Clara suddenly shouted, surprising us all. Stop it, Julian. Just stop. She turned to me with tears streaming down her cheeks. Mom, forgive me. Forgive me for everything. You're right. I treated you like trash. I took your memories, your jewelry, your dignity. And the worst part is that I did it because he convinced me you were a burden. Clara, don't listen to her, Julian tried, but she ignored him completely. He filled my head with lies about your mental health, about the dangers of you living alone. He made me feel guilty for leaving you here when all you wanted was to be in your home. Clara, shut up, Julian ordered. But it was too late. Don't you ever tell me to shut up again? She yelled at him. I am sick of your manipulations, sick of you using me to hurt my mother. The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time in years, Clara had defended what she believed was right, instead of blindly following her husband's orders. Julian looked at her with a coldness that chilled my blood. If you choose your mother over me, Clara, this relationship is over. Clara stood motionless for a moment, processing the ultimatum. Then, to my surprise, she stood up straight and looked him directly in the eye. "Then it's over," she said in a voice I had never heard from her before. Julian was paralyzed, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. For years, he had controlled Clara's every decision, every thought, every move, and now, for the first time, she had told him no. "You're not serious," he muttered with a nervous smile. "You're pregnant, Clara. You can't raise a child alone." "I won't be alone," Clara replied, looking at me for the first time in months with something that resembled love. "I have my mother, but I wasn't ready to forgive so easily. The months of humiliation, the nights spent crying, the feeling of having lost my only daughter, all of that couldn't be erased with a few words." "Clara," I said softly, "I appreciate that you've finally opened your eyes, but this doesn't fix everything that happened." Her face fell. "Mom, please. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Julian, seeing that he was losing control of the situation, adopted a different attitude. He suddenly knelt before me, with an expression of repentance I knew was fake. "Mrs. Eleanor is right. It was all my fault. I convinced Clara that you couldn't take care of yourself. I pressured her into making difficult decisions. Please, forgive me." I looked down at him, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. It was pathetic to see him grovel after months of arrogance. "You're asking for forgiveness now, Julian, when you discover I'm not the poor, helpless old woman you thought I was?" "I was terribly mistaken," he continued, with that performance I knew so well. "Let me make it up to you. We can be a happy family." "A happy family," I repeated. "Like when you threatened to have me declared incompetent? That was a mistake. Like when you called me a manipulative old woman 5 minutes ago?" Julian swallowed hard, realizing that every word he had said was being used against him. I was upset. I didn't know what I was saying. "No," I said firmly. "You knew exactly what you were saying. You were showing your true colors for the first time." I turned to Clara, who was watching the scene with an expression of shame and pain. "And you, Clara, for months you treated me like a nuisance. Do you think one apology erases all that?" "No," she admitted, in a broken voice. "I know I can't erase what I did, but I can try to make amends." "How?" Clara looked at Julian, who was still kneeling on the floor with a pleading expression. Then she looked at me. "By leaving him," she finally said. "Leaving this man who convinced me to betray the only person who has ever loved me unconditionally." Julian stood up abruptly. "You can't be serious. You're carrying my child. A child I don't want to grow up, watching his father manipulate and mistreat his grandmother." Clara responded with a determination that filled me with pride, despite everything. "Clara, you're making the biggest mistake of your life," Julian threatened. "The biggest mistake of my life was marrying you," she retorted. Diego looked at both of us with pure hatred. "This isn't over. I'm going to fight for custody of my child. I'll prove you're both crazy." "With what money are you going to fight?" I asked calmly. "Because tomorrow I'll be speaking with your boss. Did you know I have enough shares in your company to influence personnel decisions?" Julian's face went completely white. "You wouldn't dare. After everything you did to me?" "Of course I would dare. That's an abuse of power," he muttered. "Like when you abused my love as a mother to manipulate me? Like when you abused Clara's trust to turn her against me?" Julian headed for the door, but stopped before leaving. "This doesn't end here," he said, his voice full of venom. "I will destroy you both." "Try it," I replied, unfazed. "But do it from somewhere else, because you have exactly 1 hour to get your things out of my building." 1 hour? You said we had 30 days. That was when Clara was with you. Now that she's alone, there's no reason for you to continue living on my property." Julian left, slamming the door so hard it shook the entire house. Clara and I were left alone for the first time in months, surrounded by a heavy silence and documents that proved a reality still difficult to grasp. "Mom," Clara murmured after a long while, "can you ever forgive me?" I looked at her. This 30-year-old woman who had just discovered she'd been living a lie, who had betrayed her mother for a worthless man, who was pregnant and alone. "I don't know, Clara," I answered honestly. "You hurt me very deeply." "I know," she whispered, "and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." "Starting with what?" Starting by giving you back your mother's jewelry, she said, pulling out the small bag she had taken days before, and by asking if I can stay here tonight. I have nowhere else to go. I looked at the bag with my mother's jewelry, then I looked at my pregnant, lonely daughter, and I felt my heart soften just a little. One night, I finally said, "But tomorrow we start talking about how you're going to earn back my trust." Clara nodded, tears of gratitude streaming down her cheeks. "Thank you, Mom. I promise I'll make things right." But I knew that promises were easy to make and hard to keep. The real test would come in the days that followed. The next few days were strange and tense. Clara stayed in her old bedroom, which I had kept exactly the same since she got married. During the day, we moved around the house like two polite strangers, speaking only when necessary. Breakfast, the weather, her morning sickness. But I was watching every gesture, every word, every attempt by Clara to win back my trust. And what I saw surprised me. For the first time in years, my daughter was doing things for herself, without waiting for someone else to solve them for her. She washed her dishes immediately after eating, kept her room spotless, and even started helping with housework without my asking. On the third day, as I was watering my violets by the window, Clara approached with a cup of tea in her hands. "Mom, can we talk?" I nodded without turning to look at her. I was learning that silence was more powerful than 1,000 words. "I've been thinking a lot these past few days," she began, sitting in the chair where Julian used to install himself like a king, "about everything that happened, about the things I did and said." I continued watering my plants, waiting. I've realized it wasn't just Julian who changed me. I allowed him to change me. I chose to believe him instead of trusting my own heart. I finally turned to look at her. She had deep, dark circles under her eyes and looked thinner despite the pregnancy. It was clear she hadn't been sleeping well. "And why do you think that happened?" I asked her. Clara sighed deeply. "Because it was easier to blame you than to face the fact that I had married the wrong man." That honesty took me by surprise. I had expected excuses, justifications, but not such a raw admission. When Julian started complaining that you visited too often, deep down I knew he was being unfair. But it was easier to think you were being clingy than to accept that he was selfish. She placed her hands on her belly, where the pregnancy was barely noticeable. "When he started suggesting you move into a facility, I knew it was wrong. But he convinced me it was for your own good, and I wanted to believe him because it meant I didn't have to face the real problem." "What was the real problem?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. That I had married a man who didn't respect my family, who didn't respect me, and who was never going to change. In the following days, Clara began to tell me things that made my blood run cold. How Julian had gradually isolated her from her friends, convincing her they were a bad influence. How he controlled every dollar she spent, telling her that women didn't know how to handle money. How he had convinced her to quit her job because real wives dedicate themselves to the home. "And you never thought to talk to me about this?" I asked one afternoon. "Julian told me you wouldn't understand, that you were from a different generation. He convinced me that if I told you our problems, you would just tell me to leave him. And he didn't want any outside interference in our marriage." Each revelation hurt more than the last. My daughter had been suffering in silence while I thought she was happy. And when she had finally tried to reach out to me, it was too late, because Julian had programmed her to see me as the enemy. A week after Julian left, Clara received a call that left her as pale as a sheet. "It's the building manager," she told me with a trembling voice. "Julian is in the lobby. He says he has a right to come up because he's still my husband. And what did you tell him?" "That I don't want to see him. But he won't leave. He's yelling that he's going to call the police, that this is kidnapping." I stood up from my chair with a calm that surprised me. "Tell the manager I'm coming down. I'll speak with him." "Mom, no. He's very agitated. We don't know what he's capable of. That's exactly why I have to go down." When I got to the lobby, I found Julian in a rage, yelling at the poor manager who was trembling behind his desk. "That crazy old woman has my wife held hostage." Julian was screaming. "I want you to call the police right now." "Good afternoon, Julian," I said in a serene voice. He turned to me, his eyes bloodshot. He had clearly been drinking. "You! Give me back my wife, right now. Clara is exactly where she wants to be," I replied. "And if you don't leave my property immediately, I will be the one to call the police. This isn't your property. You're a liar. I took out my phone and dialed my lawyer's number, putting it on speaker. Victoria, I said when she answered. It's Eleanor. I have an agitated man here who refuses to leave my building. Could you please confirm for him that I am the legal owner? Of course, Mrs. Eleanor, my lawyer's clear voice responded. You are the sole owner of the building located at. Julian was speechless as he heard the legal confirmation. The manager looked at him with a mixture of fear and embarrassment, finally understanding the situation. Anything else you need clarified, Julian? I asked after hanging up. This isn't over, he muttered, but he no longer sounded convincing. You're right, I agreed, because tomorrow I'll be speaking with your supervisor at the company, and the day after tomorrow with the bank that gave you the loan for your car. Contacts are useful when one has enough money. Julian left without another word. But I knew he would be back. Men like him don't give up easily. 2 months later, the day of the trial arrived like a storm we had been waiting for. Julian had followed through on his threat and had sued us for parental alienation and financial manipulation, asking for full custody of the baby Clara was carrying. That morning, as I dressed in my best black suit, Clara came into my room with tears in her eyes. Mom, I'm scared, she confessed. What if the judge believes him? What if he takes my baby away from me? I hugged her for the first time in months, feeling her body tremble against mine. That's not going to happen, I assured her. We have the truth on our side. When we arrived at the courthouse, Julian was already there with a lawyer who had clearly cost him more than he could afford. He looked at me with that familiar hatred, but this time it didn't intimidate me. I had something he would never have, the peace of mind that comes from knowing you're on the right side. Clara and I sat at our table. She was wearing a purple dress that highlighted her 5-month pregnancy, and I was wearing the earrings my husband had given me for our anniversary. We were ready. Julian's lawyer began his opening statement, painting me as a vengeful woman who had used my money to destroy a happy marriage. He spoke of manipulation, of emotional blackmail, of a toxic mother-in-law who couldn't accept that her daughter had grown up. When it was our turn, my lawyer, Victoria, stood up elegantly and began to present the evidence. The text messages where Julian insulted Clara, the recordings where he threatened to leave her if she didn't kick me out of my own house, the testimonies from neighbors who had heard his yelling and abuse. But the decisive moment came when the judge looked up and stared at me. Mrs. Eleanor Mendoza? He asked with disbelief. Yes, Your Honor, I replied, confused by his reaction. The judge took off his glasses and studied me carefully. Did you work in the family court 30 years ago? My heart stopped. Yes, Your Honor. I was Judge Gonzalez's secretary. You helped me when I was an intern. You taught me how to organize case files. You brought me coffee when I worked late. You were always kind to me when everyone else treated me like I was invisible. The entire courtroom fell silent. Clara looked at me in astonishment. Julian turned pale, and I felt as if the world had stood still. Your Honor, I'm David Miller, the judge continued. Do you remember me? And then I saw him. Beneath the gray hair, the wrinkles, and the authority was the shy young man who had worked in my office decades ago. The boy I had defended when other lawyers made fun of him, the one I had encouraged when he doubted his own abilities. David, I murmured, feeling my eyes fill with tears. Of course I remember you. The judge smiled, and for a moment he was that insecure young man again, seeking approval. I never forgot your kindness, Mrs. Eleanor. You told me I would be a great judge one day, when I didn't even believe it myself. Julian and his lawyer exchanged panicked glances. They knew they had lost before they even began. Your Honor, Julian's lawyer intervened. I believe this constitutes a conflict of interest. There is no conflict, Judge Miller replied firmly. There is only justice. And after reviewing all the evidence presented, it is clear that Mr. Julian Herrera has been the only manipulator in this story. The verdict was resounding. Julian lost all rights to the baby and was issued a restraining order, forbidding him from coming near Clara or me. He also had to pay all court costs and compensation for emotional damages. When we left the courthouse, Clara hugged me like she hadn't since she was a little girl. Mom, how is it possible that the judge knew you? Life has a funny way of coming full circle, sweetheart, I replied, and kindness always comes back to you when you least expect it. 6 months later, when my granddaughter Hope was born, I understood that it had all been worth it. Clara had found herself again. She had become the loving mother I always knew she could be. One afternoon, as we were rocking the baby in the garden of our home, Clara asked me a question I had been waiting for. "Mom, have you really forgiven me?" I looked at her. This woman who had grown so much in such a little time, who had learned to value what was truly important. "I forgive you, Clara," I finally said. "But more importantly, you've learned to forgive yourself." That evening, as I prepared tea in my old chipped mug, I thought of my husband and his letter. I had used the power he left me exactly as he had hoped, not to hurt, but to protect and to teach. Clara had learned that true love is not based on control, but on respect. And I had learned that it's never too late to stand up for your dignity. Looking out the window at the garden where my granddaughter was playing, I smiled. Some battles are worth fighting, and some victories taste sweeter when they are long in coming. In the end, I hadn't needed to shout to be heard. I had only needed to remember who I truly was, and to defend it with the quiet confidence of someone who knows she is on the right side of history. 5 years after the trial, my life had taken a turn I never could have imagined. Little Hope, now a 4-year-old girl with her mother's lively eyes and my own stubborn streak, was running through the garden, chasing butterflies, while Clara and I prepared Sunday lunch. Grandma Eleanor. "Look what I found," Hope shouted, running toward me with a yellow flower in her tiny hands. "It's beautiful, my love," I said, lifting her up for a kiss. "Should we put it in the vase with the others?" Clara smiled at me from the kitchen. In these years, she had blossomed in an extraordinary way. She had gone back to school and now worked as an accountant for a small but prosperous company. And above all, she had recovered that spontaneous laugh I remembered from her childhood. "Mom, a letter came for you," she said, handing me an elegant envelope. It was from the foundation I had established 2 years earlier, with part of my husband's inheritance. Home and Dignity had become a refuge for older women suffering from family abuse or neglect. What had started as a way to honor my own experience had transformed into something much bigger. "What does it say?" Clara asked, drying her hands on her apron. "They're inviting us to the inauguration of the third house," I replied, feeling that deep satisfaction that only comes from knowing your pain served a greater good. "They're going to house 15 more women. In these years, we had helped more than 50 women rebuild their lives. Some arrived as I had been, stripped of their dignity by ungrateful children or abusive relatives. Others came alone, without family, but with similar stories of neglect and mistreatment." The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Clara went to open it and returned with a mysterious smile. "Mom, you have a visitor." Behind her appeared Judge David Miller, now retired, accompanied by an elegant woman with silver hair. "Mrs. Eleanor," he greeted me with that warm smile he still had from his youth. "I'd like to introduce you to my wife, Helen. It's an honor to meet you," Helen said, taking my hands. "David has told me so much about you. He says you were one of the most important people in his professional development." "He exaggerates," I replied, but I felt deeply moved. "Not at all," David insisted, "and that's why we wanted to invite you personally. The Retired Judges Association is going to give you an award for your work with the foundation." "That's not necessary," I started to say. "Yes, it is," he interrupted me. "Your story inspired many of us to reflect on true justice, the kind that goes beyond written laws." After they left, Clara and I sat on the patio while Hope played with her dolls. The garden was more beautiful than ever. I had hired a gardener, but I still personally cared for the violets my husband had loved so much. "You know what I admire most about you, Mom?" Clara asked suddenly. "What's that?" "That you never became bitter. After everything I put you through, after all the pain, you never let it harden your heart." "Of course I became bitter," I admitted. "There were nights when resentment ate me up inside. But your father taught me something very valuable in his letter." "What did he teach you?" "That true power doesn't come from revenge, but from the ability to transform pain into something useful for others." Clara nodded, understanding. She herself had experienced that transformation. She now volunteered at the foundation, using her own experience to advise young women who had fallen into toxic relationships. "Did you ever find out what happened to Julian?" she asked. "Victoria, my lawyer, told me he moved to another state. Apparently, he got remarried." I paused, choosing my words carefully. I hope he learned something from all of this. But honestly, it's no longer my concern. "You're not curious?" "No," I answered honestly. "I learned that some people only come into your life to teach you lessons. Once you learn the lesson, you can let them go." Hope came running over, her cheeks flushed from playing. "Grandma, tell me the story of the brave grandma." It was her favorite story, a child-friendly version of what had happened. In my version, the grandma discovered she had magic powers and used them to protect her family from the big bad dragon. Again? I feigned complaint, but I was already lifting her onto my lap. "Yes, and don't forget the part where the good judge helps her." As I told the story for the umpteenth time, I thought about how strange fate was. I had needed to lose everything to discover what I truly had. I had needed to hit rock bottom to find my true strength. "And they all lived happily ever after?" Hope asked when I finished. "And they all lived happily ever after." "The brave grandma found her happy ending," I concluded. "Did you find your happy ending, Grandma?" I looked around. At Clara setting the table for dinner, at the blooming garden, at the beautiful granddaughter in my arms, at the letter from the foundation that promised to help more women. "Yes, my love," I answered her. "I found it." That night, after putting Hope to bed, I sat in my favorite chair with a cup of tea and the letters that arrived weekly from the women we had helped. A 75-year-old woman thanked me for giving her the courage to confront her abusive son. A 60-year-old woman told me she had gotten her house back after her grandchildren tried to swindle her. Each letter was a confirmation that my experience had served something greater than my own pain. Clara sat beside me with her own cup of tea. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" "About your father," I admitted. "About how proud he would be of what we've built." "I'm sure he's watching us," Clara murmured. "And about you," I continued, "about how proud I am of the woman you've become." "I learned from the best," she replied, taking my hand. We sat in silence, enjoying the tranquility of the evening. In the distance, we could hear the soft sounds of the city, but here, in our garden, peace reigned. "I love you, Mom," Clara whispered. "And I love you too, sweetheart," I replied. "I have always loved you, even in the darkest moments." And it was true. A mother's love transcends wounds, disappointments, betrayals. It is stronger than pride, more enduring than resentment, more powerful than any fortune. That night, I slept deeply, without nightmares, without worries. I had found something worth more than all the money in the world. The peace of knowing I had used my second chance wisely. In the end, it wasn't about how much money I had or how much power I had wielded. It was about having transformed my pain into purpose, my humiliation into strength, and my experience into wisdom for others. I had learned the most important lesson of all, that it's never too late to defend yourself. It's never too late to change your story. And it's never too late to find your true worth.